interpretation or only sort of the sub.
All right.
For this set, there's alternate ones that people argue about. Well, is that
Here we are,
right?
everyone.
Or is that
Welcome.
just a typo that somebody did?
I've been looking forward to this Sunday. My friend Chad is going to lead us through part 2 of his seminar on runes and their Christian origin. And he's also, if memory serves, going to teach us how to write our name in runic verse. Why don't I lift us up in a word of prayer? Heavenly Father, I thank you for the gift of language or speech, that of all the ways in which you could have created the cosmos, you spoke words, let there be light. You formed the earth, and most perfectly through your Son, the Logos, you revealed your truth to us. So I pray that these runes would enliven us to your reality and truth, and the way that revelation works in the world. In Christ's name, amen.
Welcome back. This should be more fun than last time because we're going to do some practical. No, it's not practical. We're going to do some physical things here. You'll find over on the table there's some cardstock and flashcards and markers and pencils, and so towards the end we'll move towards that. Where I stopped last time was just to point out the complexity of if you want to learn the runes so that you can look at a random inscription and just read it and amaze your friends, it's quite challenging. Historically, there was a rune for the sound that is the Y in yellow. We say yellow. In the International Phonetic Alphabet, we use a J because J actually is pronounced Y in more languages than English. But the symbol for that developed for the Anglo-Saxons in Old English into a straight line with a little X on it. However, later on they decided, well, we'll just make that with instead of an X, we'll put a little box around it, and then we have this to spare, so we'll have it make a different sound, an I-O diphthong sound. So if you look at one, you don't know right off whether that's a Y or an EL. On the other hand, there's ways of pronouncing YO and EO that are the same, but they can mean very different things because the letters are different. But that Y sound was the beginning of a lot of words in Scandinavian languages because you use it in grammatical changing of words, as if you speak German, the beginning of. So you'd use it for grammar a lot, but the Scandinavians stopped doing that. And so they didn't need that sound, so they just reapportioned it to what was left over, which was an ah sound. So it went from being a Y sound to being an ah sound. And then they decided, well, that's confusing because we have inscriptions that have the other one, so we use a different symbol for that. So then they said, oh, okay, well, since it was confusing, let's reuse it as an H sound. And so it's an H sound in a bunch of later kinds of inscriptions. So if you look at a particular inscription, and you don't know what century, and it's in stone, so you can't age check it, then it gets a little, reading them is something that scholars like to debate and argue about. The opposite occurred. This is a K sound, and it's the same symbol, and just but over a period of from 200 to 500 years, 300 years, or almost 400. It was done in a variety of ways. On the handout from last week that had alphabets, it has some variants shown on those, but there are more variants, and in the writing over 1,200 year period, there's more variants. But one of the things that happened was that for the K sound, the Anglo-Saxons ended up having 3 different things to show that sound, and all three of them are actually used on the Ruthwell Cross to write the Dream of the Rood, where one is at the beginning of Christ, and a different one is used at the end of the word Mick, which just means mine, and another one is used, and I know a scholar who suggested it was just a typo. But I like to use it when I ruin my name, so I routinely use a typo. The only reason I bring this up, not for you to learn any of this, but to realize that this is a very complex topic looking over well, thousands of years, 2,000 years really, and language has changed. So you can find that amusing or frustrating, depending on how you go. There were some, I just want to quickly, a couple of areas where these were used by Christians that I hadn't talked about last week. During the Anglo-Saxon period, we have a fair amount of poetry from that time period. There was a poet named Cunewulf who signed his poetry by sticking his name in runes in the last page of his manuscripts. So he is one of only 4 Anglo-Saxon poets whose name we know, but he stuck it into multiple of his poems. And just so you know, it's the fate of the apostles and Christ too. They didn't actually put titles on their poems, by the way. Beowulf is not the title of Beowulf. They just decided because we need titles. They did not expect, they sat around and said, hey, say that poem about, those people who did this thing. And then it was the poet's job to go and put that out. Runes were used in a lot of the manuscripts. There's a few of them listed here as adjuncts to using the Latin alphabet to do things. I did mention that the runestones themselves were probably painted. We've checked for, with chemical analysis. So the Yellingstone, which I mentioned, was in Denmark, where the king was claiming to have Christianized the Danes, which had Christ on one side. It probably was that colorful originally. Of course, now it's a gray stone with carving on it, so you wouldn't know that, but they've done microscopic analysis to see the colors and recreate them. They were used in the case of St. Cuthbert, who's my favorite saint, but I won't explain why. British saint, favorite British saint. But his coffin got carried around for a long time, and his coffin got put in another coffin, which is why it was preserved fairly well. It was sealed up. When it was opened, it has pictures of the 4 apostles. It has 3 of their names in runes. Luke is not in runes, only in the Latin alphabet. And so then the same scholars but that's because he was a Greek and not a Jew, and so that's why they did that, because they only were honor the Jewish evangelists by putting their names in runes, or not, because we don't know. No one's around to explain this to us. But fortunately, if your name is Matthew, Mark, or John, you can see exactly how to write your name in runes there. But if it's Luke, you're out of luck. We're going to have to wing it. This is another example, so just of how the name of a rune would change, and the same name would be reused for a different sound at different time periods, and how shapes would be inverted and reverted and so on, and how one symbol, this is a vowel, this is the second in all the rows, this is originally was an oo sound, but by the time it was Old Norse, that one symbol was being used for a half dozen different vowels. They went to a sort of a shorthand thing, and you just had to guess. Just as you did with Hebrew, when Hebrew had no vowels signed in it. So it's not unique. It just makes it challenging to go like, oh, I can read that rune line. It just says, well, what year was it? What language is it? So they're challenging that way. I just wanted to point out house blessings, which we've just had here, are not a new thing. This is a house blessing written on a piece of yew found in Frisia, which is in the Netherlands. Let's see, this is, I'm going to pop to this next one. I had mentioned bind runes, and I want to just quickly go into that. Bind runes are very popular amongst neo-pagans and so on. Bind runes do occur in the Elder Futhark. In most cases there, we don't know what on earth they're for. And in the Middle Ages, they were used, and used in the ways that are now used by modern people to go, well, if this rune had this name and this rune has that name, I can make a phrase by putting them together, and it can have a magical meaning or something like that. On the other hand, it allows for poetry to do a juxtaposition of a shape and a word and a concept and a layering of ambiguity that can be very entertaining. It also can just be good looking. And everyone knows at least one bind rune because you've got Bluetooth on your devices, and Bluetooth comes from Haralda Bluetooth. Let's see, do I keep that on here? Oh, we'll come back to that, because actually, when we talk about writing someone's name, his name's interesting. He was a king, and the fact that there's no clear spelling on his name is part of the indication that you get to spell your name in runes however you feel. But you can see how the two were combined, and that's the clearest thing. There are a lot of things that are not ligatures, like the A and the E that Oliver was talking about, are things that are used in languages that are connected. But there were 2 types of bind runes that come up quite commonly. One was a case where 2 types of runes. We originally had a rune that makes the ing sound, and it actually has different shapes at different times. But it's not a vowel, it's only a consonant. But ing sound, ing, the really full ing, not just the ing part of it, is very common. And so if you combine the I rune, which conveniently looks like an I, with this shape, you can come up with this kind of a lantern thing for ing, and that comes up a lot, in any kind of verb that ends in ing, and so that sort of thing. So they put them together, and it's a shorthand, so it just lets you, not write as many shapes or carve as many shapes, not have to sharpen your chisel as many times. So there's that one kind. But another kind is this more creative one, where they're put on a single center stave. So you have the thing, because there's a lot of verticals in this, and you can put, just as they did with Bluetooth, with a center stave of the H. This is that funny H that got reused for all those sounds, and then this usually means birch, pronounced different ways in English. You put those together with the central thing. Well, they had long ones. This is a picture of, it doesn't come with us, that's a ship, and that's the mast, and down the mast is a series of runes put together that mean that the guy who this was a memorial to was a great thane, which is a sort of a middling rank of upper middle class, bourgeois kind of guy. Yes?
Thing, T-H-E-N-G, or Thane, T-H-A-N-E?
Well, so in this case, neither of those, because it's a bad, and those are sort of the same and sort of different.
Yeah.
So I would have to look up to remember, and I have looked into this in the past.
One's more Anglo-Saxon.
Correct. Yeah. So and it was probably borrowed one way or the other, but you can know. So when I was young, we always said that the Scandinavians borrowed stuff. As it turns out, because of the digression. Sorry. We can talk about who borrowed thing from whom and who had a bigger impact. The Danes or the English on each other's languages on it in a whole different venue. Sorry. I did want to point out for those of you who do German, this is how the double S that throws people off in fracture writing in German is actually an S. This is a long form S, which actually comes from a runic version of S, going with this, which was actually an SZ sound, then a double S, which you will see on signs in Germany still to this day, and people go, why is a B making an S sound? It's because an S and a Z were put together and then are pronounced as a double S, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it has no mystical implications at all. And that's the reason I have it there, is that when your local neo-pagan tells you that this magical spell is done by putting these things together, it also means that Fußgängerplatz has some mystical meaning as well. Also, J.S. Bach, who we all know was a fairly Christian guy, did something really cool himself. He's a graphics artist as well as a musician, which I never knew. But he took his initials and he reversed them and put them together and made this shape out of his. So and I understood this, the artistic potential of bind runes, like of monograms, is enormous. And on monograms, the Chrismon, we have these things that we have in church, IHS and symbols like that people may or may not know, but they know they're in a church if they see them on things. They did do these. They do exist actually on St. Cuthbert's coffin. So if you want a good, authentic Anglo-Saxon one to do that in your Christian artistic use of runes, we actually have a historical transposition of this. And I point here, this is the way they do IHS, and then the Christos, which is a different usage of it that I'm used to seeing, but is that same kind of Christian symbol. All right. So how were runes used in the past? Well, as I point out, the most common thing they were used for labeling. This is a comb, this is John's, these are herring. They were used for claiming credit. Gunnar cut these, a lot of people like to do this. Joe put this up in memory of Harry and so on. Straight memorializations where they didn't do that, and my favorite one is when Vigmund had this stone carved in memory of himself, the cleverest of men. May God help the soul of Vigmund, the ship captain. Vigmund and Alfred carved this memorial while he lived. But Alfred is a woman's name, so most likely that was the real brains of the outfit. They're used for prayers. Outright prayers, I just ran across the thing, is only about 13% of the Scandinavian runes are outright prayers. There's a lot of times where they say, pray for this person, that's something, but, and they would have long lists. These would help you if your name is Michael, Peter, John, Andrew, Lawrence, Thomas, Olaf, Clement, Nicholas. Then you can look up exactly how Scandinavians would have written those names at a particular time. They were used not just for Christian prayers, though there are two, where there's reference to a pagan god. There's two pagan prayers on rune stones that we've found so far. Next Thursday we might find a different one. And they weren't used nearly for Scandinavian or Germanic, so you have, I don't do Latin very well, so, but we have Rex Eudorum in nomine Patris Nazarenus is then just transliterated into runes on a stone. So when I pointed out the ones that were on wood that we found in Norway, where they were doing like people do texting, just little bits of messages, not long, not literature. Literature is reserved for Latin alphabet. So they say, Githa tells you to get home, my love, kiss me, lots more inappropriate things. There's a Neolithic tomb in Orkney, a barrow, where one would find a barrow right. And in 1150 or so, a set of Orkney Norse guys who just come back from a crusade to Jerusalem, burrowed into it in the middle of winter and sat out a storm. It was cold, so they dug into the top of this thing. It was a multi-chambered Neolithic chamber tomb, and they wrote 30-odd graffiti things, most of which said, you know, Ingmar was here. One of them is, Ingmar wrote this really high, and it's really high up on the wall. They're very clever, these things, but, and there's like 30 of them. It's one of the largest collections of runic stone inscriptions in one place by different authors, and they're all pretty much, there is one that says the Jarl who was with them actually found treasure in the corner and took it with him, so some of them are exciting like that, but most of them are just, and some of them are completely inappropriate, as a bunch of soldiers huddling in a tomb in the middle of winter in a snowstorm might write. People are people. They are occasionally used for magical things, as is, you know, abracadabra used in the same thing. They're used for a lot of art, the Frank's casket, the rune poem, the Dream of the Rune, St. Cuthbert's coffin, the Hobbit. They're used for cultural association. I was mentioning that this was a thing that became as a way to identify, hey, we're the Scandinavians, and we were cultured even before the Mediterranean people showed up. And they're used for evangelism in ways where the Christian message is put forward, as in the Ruthwell Cross, Cross, Swedish runestones, Bride-Kirk baptismal font, the cross slabs on Isle of Man. There's a variety of them where they were clearly public messages about Christian identity of a region. I think that's intended as evangelism. So, what do they use for now? Well, I'll look at the verses. One of them is the holdover of a thorn. Thorn was a rune that looks like a P where the middle slipped down. That represents the TH sound, both voiced and unvoiced. In the middle, when the monks showed up in Britain, they didn't have a TH sound, and so they used thorn, and they would write this in Latin scripts, and they would just have in this for the TH sound. They also used the W. There was no W at that point in Latin, and so they used Rune, which looks like a P, but it's pointy on this end. This TH sound was kept in orthography because CH is inefficient, and so they would, in manuscripts, this is the, and that's that, and it's the thorn with an E and a thorn with a T after it, just put above it. And that turned into the ye because of how printing was done. And so on the old Curiosities shop downtown on the pier, or in the old pizza parlor, that's just the. It's not ye, it's the, and it's just representing the sound. So you do things and you don't even know you're doing it. They're used as decor. There's a certain something about a symbol that means something that is attractive to people. Of course, there's this shape and so on, but this is just a category that runes fall into. You know, is the person who buys this poster and puts it on their wall, it comes framed, you get it on Etsy, that's from an Etsy thing. It's the same kind of person that thinks kanji is interesting about the names of the planets, or even Morse code. You know, it's that, well, this has meaning, and it slows your mind down a little bit to think. So an S, if we see a lesson in Latin, it doesn't mean anything to us. We don't go, oh, S, well, Superman maybe, but normally you don't go, S. But if you see an S, and it's represented by a kanji character or Morse code, dot, dot, you know, there's something that engages the mind. Yes?
You may have spoken to this last time, because I was 30 minutes late, unfortunately, but ideograms, kanji,
Yes.
somewhat contextually defined. They're put in a series. It isn't just literal XYZ.
No,
1,
no,
2,
right,
3.
yeah.
Are runes the same way?
So-
is there a more contextual piece?
There is, to the extent that they're used to mean the name of them, the examples that we have are only of them as a simple shortening of the thing. They're never put together to create a thing. In modern neo-paganism, yes, they are.
Into
That's
words, quote unquote.
into, yeah. But so I had an example in Snorri Sturluson gave us, whoops, did I done something? Dun, dun, dun. I've broken myself. Let's see. I shouldn't have tried to go back. Okay. I'll show you an example later. We were having some funny interactions between my computer and the projector earlier, and so I had best not. But only is the simple meaning, like the word man is used for very much like the VH thing to just be man in texts. And there's about 4 of them that are used that way is in what we have. But of course, what we have is just what's historically lasted. So there could be things that don't. They're used as decor and decoration. They look cool. You can make Christmas ornaments out of vine rings. Make your own decision about what you might want to do. Oddly, I had lunch with a former student of my wife's who's from Africa, who had this on his phone, except that here it had a vegvisser, which is actually a bit of late medieval ceremonial magic that then was copied into Iceland in around 1500, and so people think it's Viking, but it's not. But this instead is a bit of, there's an old saying that says, every person has 2 wolves inside of them, a good one and a bad one, which one will you feed? But it also crosses over to a Norse myth that says that during Ragnarok, a wolf will eat the sun and a wolf will eat the moon. So they all get fed. This says, not all who wander are lost, which many people will know. And this is that Ing rune, and this is the D rune. And I think they just look cool, and that's the person for this. And theoretically, this is maybe Still or the Tree of Life, or not. And but people use them in art, and they write English in them, or other languages. Writing them in a circle seems to be, by the way, is not a historical thing. A huge percentage of all of the inscriptions are just a Futhork, that's a full alphabet of the runes, being written. People would just go and carve them as practice, or to show that they'd learned them. Putting them in a circle is a modern invention, and is extremely popular, apparently. Let's see if I can, yes, give them back. You see them in circles on things all the time. They're used as decorations. People can get a t-shirt. But unfortunately, just to annoy me, they mix them together. This is Younger Futhok for man. That's the rune that I said is used for man. And it does like a man who's got his hands upraised and praying, which is why there's a person who has was considering a tattoo, and this is from Psalm 134:2, lift up your hands, so a praying person within an ideographic use of a man with his hands raised. This is actually medieval runes in the alphabet. This is a pillow, and I like it because it uses at least the same M sound for the middle. I don't know why you have a pillow with a man symbol in the middle. Oh, there's no woman symbol. I just was suddenly thinking maybe it was his and hers. Nope, it's just arbitrary. But they do use them for decoration. This one's annoying to me because this is Elder Futhark. You can tell, to tell them, you look for diagnostic runes, as they say. This is one that's used for this. It means elf here, then it means man in this context of Younger Futhark. So, but they're decorations, so people like them. They are also used for serious art. There are classes in how to use runes in art. Bind runes, this is just the potential of the creativity that one could do. I have no idea. You could do an analysis and look, this would be the win. There's a lot of things it could be, and it's striking. You can get cookie cutters. You can get cookie cutters and make bind rune cookies and serve them to your friends. And you can tell them, well, this means the Trinity, and this means, the wrong idea of soteriology, and this is the correct one. You can get leather marking set of runes to mark your leather with, and people are doing things like this, which is, this is what runes would have looked like, and then, I don't know what that means, but people are doing this in the culture, and, shucks, the pokes are this. Does anybody know what these are? Does anybody here recognize those? Those are rune stones from Assassin's Creed, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So clearly, all the gamers found my class too boring and didn't come this time.
I just haven't gotten to it. Yes.
Okay. All right. So that's Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This is your normal. I have a lot of books about runes, and these are the kind I don't buy. But the guide to using ancient runes for modern divination, for picking your stocks. Again, the use of bind runes, very, very popular. Made up meanings for the runes. You can get nail decals. And who does this? But it's enough. Somebody, as a marketing thing, nail decals. And you could put your name. So if you figure out how to do your name, you could do it on your hand. If you have a short name, you could do that. This one's interesting. So this is cadets in both the Army and the Air Force in current Germany. They did away with almost all of the Nazi rune stuff, but they kept Urfel, which surprises me a little because they tend to be pretty averse to doing those things, but it's still used as a symbol on uniforms now for cadets, most senior rank of cadets. There are Christians who make use of runes for tattoos. This is, praised be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle. It is in Old Icelandic, which we have the Psalms in Old Icelandic, which is about 90% Old Norse. And this one is particularly, I've discovered, a very popular biblical citation by a certain subsection of Christian culture. And that was just so painful to me. But it's the correct runes for a particular time in a particular language, so it's authentic that way. Here in Oslo, you have, at the Oslo Opera House, Thor has come back. That says Ragnar Homer. Interestingly, that's in modern Norwegian, this was on a Facebook post, and I said, why would Thor speak modern Norwegian? Everything we know about him, he spoke Old Norse. And they got so offended. It was just terrible. It was well, he can do anything. Well, yes, but then why wouldn't you speak English?
Ragnarok hammer.
No, Ragnarok is coming. It's just the verb, it's coming. Oh, and then I said it would be better to, if it's Ragnarok after Homer, which is Old Norse, it means Ragnarok's coming back. So, that would be, just while we're working on poetry and art and so on. But this is in Snohomish County, just from last year. This is an individual who put up a new gateway over their entry, a couple of posts with a cross thing, and wanted to do like a house blessing thing for themselves, and they're not Christian. But an interesting thing is this is written in English words. The words on the right are what it says. And the little piece of poetry is the place I could track it down to. It's on a bridge in Wales. And it just has this thing, it's a gateway to a town, and it says, "Hail guest, I ask not what thou art. If friend, I greet thee hand and heart. If stranger, such no longer be. If foe, my love shall conquer thee." Which is a nice thing to write on your gatepost of your house, as a thing. I have no idea what bind runes are supposed to mean, but they mean whatever the person intended. And then to get even closer, this is in a Sunday school classroom in King County. They are having rune stones there. And this is actually just down the hall, and they're not really rune stones. They're stones that have a bunch of symbols, but it happens to have 3 of them that are runes. So just by accident, you can have something that looks like that. So, and then people who have no artistic ability can take advantage of Wikimedia licenses and combine things as they choose and come up with things like this. And you can transliterate, by the way, Latin into runes. That's commonly done historically, so you can do it yourself. So, how can you use runes? So I have a list of the ways they've been done historically, and for most of those, labeling them is not So I've used them to label my hymns. Historic European martial arts, hitting people with swords. So with my things that I did, I thought I would mark them with runes. And I have a friend who is a potter, and he has a little bind rune, and he marks the bottom of his pottery with it, and it looks cool. And he can always tell, when it comes out of the kiln, you can look really quick, and it's his. Most of the other things, I think, aren't particularly something that we would do, but there is a tradition of Christian art using runes. And to those of you who might be participating in that, that is ongoing. For cultural association, there's the issue. If you let these symbols only be used by people, and they were used by the Nazis, and they are used by, so that Othel one that is on the rank insignia is a primary one used by white separatists in the United States. It means community, that's why they use it, or inheritance. But if you only let people misuse a set of symbols, you're ceding territory to them, and so I think there's a reason to not do that. And then for evangelism, via fun, scholarship, and participation in popular culture. You're supposed to be engaged with people, and clearly there is a modern interest in runes, and so it's certainly not a major thing, but it is something that could be considered. So now we get to the fun part. How can you write your names in rune? Going back to the Yelling Stone and King Harold Bluetooth Gormson. I was like, Gormston's a nice name. Harold Bluetooth. We have his name written on his stones because he memorialized himself. And there, the way they did it was as Haraldr. So the R at the end just means that it's talking about yourself, nominative case. I'm that R. The rune that's used for that only represents that particular usage of this is about me. It's called nominative case. And my wife's not here, so I get away with telling you that. It's a funny, but that particular rune gets used in funny ways because it has no particular, it's only for, the sound used for that in the language has changed, and they kept using the same rune. So the total rune, its sound totally changes. But then it was adopted at the end to do the X sound for Christ, and so it's used in that way in Anglo-Saxon runes. And so there's an arbitrariness to the way these go. So if you're going to write your name in runes, you need to pick a rune line to use. On the handout from last week, you can see, look, we got 1,400 years worth of runes. So there's different shapes at different times that you want to do. Different ones were used for different languages. We have some of the handouts from last week, so you can take a look at them. So if you want it to represent the sounds of your name, you need to know what the sounds they represented. And unfortunately, the little letters on that chart are transliteration things. They were there so that you could print this in writing. They don't really mean the sound of a thing. So you have to do some research if you really want to have it represent sounds. On the other hand, if you use just those as the sound representations, that can work. So, but they don't actually represent all the sounds of your name, most likely. Most likely your name is an anglicized version if it wasn't English in the first place. I mean, is anyone here whose name is Sigurthur? Oh, because you'd be in luck, because that one's really easy to do in runes. But
I go by it as a nickname.
okay, well then, and having that in runes is pretty good. So, so your name's probably been anglicized and then Americanized. And he was also on non-stressed syllables. We said Elizabeth. Do we have any Elizabeths?
No.
Yes. So one of the problems or an issue you run into is that E doesn't make the same sound in Elizabeth the two times. One of them. No, it's a different vowel. So, here's an interesting thing. If you can't spell anything in English, you have to do these things really carefully, and so I shouldn't try it on the fly. If you have unstressed vowels in American names tend to be a schwa sound, and it's a sort of a sound that we don't notice. There is no rune in any of the rune runes that represents that particular sound. So a rule of thumb is to go ahead and use a rune that would be, if it was a stressed syllable, so that you actually say the rune name. That's just a way people tend to address that issue. Or you leave it out completely, because unstressed sounds probably did exist in those languages, but they didn't represent them with a character. So I did break that in there. So then, for those of us who are American, the Anglo-Frisian Futhark, it's the longest one. It has the most sounds, and so it's probably, if you wanted to do a thing, and it is the one that Tolkien used as the basis for when he did the Hobbit and so on, so you can look like that. And so that's one that people like. It has a lot of diphthongs and so on. It does have some stuff that is a little different. As I showed on the Prince Casket, if you have a SH sound in your name, like Sean, that's done by an SC character if you're trying to copy what it would have been in Anglo-Saxon England. And those are the kinds of decisions that you have to think about. If you wanted to take your name, and your name was John, and you were thinking about it at a particular place, well, it could be Ian or Juan or a variety of different things, and so those issues arise. Also, there's some orthographic things that, for instance, in the Scandinavian languages, double letters were not used. Even if it was, if your name was Fred Dugan, the D's that are together, they would only do one. And they'd run your first and last name together, it would be Fred Dugan with just one D. On the other hand, the Anglo-Saxons, they did double letters, and in fact, doubling a consonant at the end of the word was like adding a Y, you know, to go Will to Willie, or Susie at the end of a name to make it diminutive. You double the letter consonant at the end of a word, and that's, so Chad, my name, was actually, for St. Chad, had two little D's, was Little Chatty was St. Chad, so. There's the handout of the runes, and you know, you can use different ways to represent them, also in different fonts. And how I did my name, because there is an Old English Saint Chad, and it originally comes from Welsh though, so it's not an Anglo-Saxon name, so you get to pick the C-A-D. The C was pronounced as a CH sound in front of a front vowel. There's a difference between German and Anglo-Saxon. So it can be done with 3 letters or 4 or 5, because as I mentioned, the D is doubled in the saint's name, because he was little Chad, who was a younger brother. Saint Ted was his older brother, he was saint first. So when your older brother becomes a saint before you are, just nobody ever lets you grow up. And then my last name is Gaelic, as a Gaelic derivative, so it's kind of arbitrary how you want to do that. Although Ruthwell's in Scotland now. It was in Northumbria at the time that the cross was put up, but it's in Scotland now, so I can claim that alphabet if I want to. Historically, we know the progression of St. Chad. It's always handy if you've got a saint to be named after. It's really handy if you've got, you know, hardcore Reformed ancestors and you still ended up being named after a saint by accident. Yes?
So, Claire is
Yes.
French origin,
Right.
but there is a Saint Clair, well, it was Saint Clair of Assisi, but I think Saint Clair goes way back.
Right. So you could look, and there are different, I have some resources to go look for, to see if you can find an inscription that has Clare that's either Scandinavian or in Anglo-Saxon. And so you might find one, and that has an appeal to me, is to try to copy one that was historically done that way. St. Chad was, there's no runic inscriptions about him, but Clare there might be. I wouldn't know all, I mean, you know, there's thousands of them, so. Everyone likes to look at the runestone ones, they don't look at some of those lesser inscriptions, you know, where some St. Clair might be cited. Otherwise, you would have to make a choice. Well, do I want to do it like a Viking? Do I want to do it like an Anglo-Saxon? Do I want to do it like a, you know, the elder Futhark? For some reason, the elder Futhark, which was written, its inscriptions are written in a Proto-Germanic language that they've totally had to reconstruct, but people like those symbols better. They seem more, they have more touch, and so you could just use them from the phonetic things there.
Well, I'm half Swedish, half Finnish.
Oh, okay.
Gravitating toward
The Scandinavian.
But I married a Baddeley, half British.
Oh, there you go. Well, and you can do different ones, as I showed at the beginning on my very first slide, which I'll go back to later. I have like 6 ways that I've tried ruining my name to do different things, because one of the things that occurs is, time is short, is that you can take just the meaning of your name. So in my case, Chad means battle, and in Scandinavian, the name Gunnar means battle. So I could just ruin my name as Gunnar because it's written on a bunch of runestones, so we know exactly, actually, there's multiple spellings, because of course, you know, there's no school of spelling when these people were doing this, so you have that. But I could use Gunnar to do it. And this gets us to the references. And so then, we have flashcards, markers, this rune lines, and I have a rune converter program that I will bring up if we had a technical difficulty earlier, and I was not able to do that, but I'm going to try to bring it up, and you don't have to learn anything. And we can just type your name, pick a Futhark, put your name in it, and it'll convert it. But also, you have on today's handout links that have the rune converters URL, so you can do it yourself at home also. Also, to learn these things, depending on what you're trying to learn to do, the professional runologists really do have to get degrees. I mean, it's a huge thing about language and so on. If you're just interested in doing it for fun, there's a lot of books, there's a lot of YouTube things, there's even games. You can go on and there's games where you can learn your runes and then practice to see how fast can you, it pops up and says, thorn, and then you hit your thing and you can time yourself to see how fast you can do them, which is one way to do it. Oh, by the way, that's the Serfs of Bearth North, this here, which is a big knife that was found in the Thames River and is now kept in the museum in London, where I've seen it, but just here on the edges. But at any rate, so if you want to help yourself to markers and writers and want to try this for those, and then I will try to shift over to the Rune Converter application, and then I can stick stuff in and you can see what you wanted to copy. So, were there any questions before we shift over to that? Yes?
I noticed that they put dots between the words, so there's no spaces, so you just put a dot between everything?
So we like that, and that was done by the Anglo-Saxons.
Okay.
That was almost never done by the Scandinavians. They did no spaces at all. One of the reasons why it's hard to read inscriptions is it just goes, and runes are written left to right. They're also written right to left. They're also written back and forth, and there's a word for that that means Vasa force. It's an ox going through, they're written back and forth. So you can do it however you like. When they were written from right to left instead of left to right, sometimes they just flip them around. Sometimes they'd still write them oriented left to right and do it. You've got examples of all of those. So this is a much more of an art thing than an archaeological thing to recreate your runes. So you could decide to make a palindrome or whatever, like S.J. Bach, run it in backwards. There's a lot of things that you could do. So it depends on what you're trying to do. Are you trying to recreate your name in a certain time and language? Then you go one way. If you were trying to be artistic, you can do a different one. If you want people to actually be able to make it out, I like having the dot markers. You'll find ones where one dot is between words and two dots was used between sentences, and multiple dot arrangements were done at the beginning and ending of things. So they would do those, all of
So
those
the
examples.
Anglo-Saxons, would they go from left to right and then back to left and then right?
Most commonly, Anglo-Saxon is actually left to right. Most of the Anglo-Saxon stuff was clearly influenced by Latin-speaking monks who got in there and said, this is cool for little epigraphic stuff, but let's get rational. And so they did the markings in between, they did it left to right.
And then when they got to the end, they would go back to the left?
They'd go back to the
Okay.
left and go again. That is when writing in manuscript form. On stones, they would wander around on the stones.
Okay.
And there is something very strange. I showed the rune stones where, in Scandinavia particularly, where there's lots and lots of runes, it's almost like we don't have any notion as to why these people who had very, very structured poetry, it's very much dependent on the stress and the syllables, and it's alliterative, but they just wander all over the stone. They just wander around in random circles, and they run out at the end with not enough space. And so there's some like, don't lay this out ahead of time. Now they made these ships that could cross the sea. These guys knew how to do precise stuff. And then for some reason they thought, no, don't take a piece of charcoal and write on the stone first so that you know where to carve. No, just spend 4 weeks and then go, and at the end I gotta write up the edge because I ran out of space. And it's over and over again. So it's clearly a cultural thing, and people write papers about this, of what would have been the reason why these people would do this, and we don't know. And again, one of the reasons why runes are fun.
Did the Scandinavians write left and right as well?
Scandinavians was where you run into left to right to left, and the Vasa force thing. So most commonly I do left to right, because if you want anybody else to read it, they will try reading it left to right first. So I suggest that. But if you're doing art, then going back and forth is fine, Yes.
So I grew up in a household where runes would have been met with suspicion,
Yes.
and this is only pagan. Where did that come from? Is that a reaction to the Enlightenment figure that you named?
Yeah, and in the sequence of that, yes. Subsequent, so at all times, anything that's mystical, just like the signs of the planets, which were, so astrology is a superstition. It originally was an attempt at technology. You're keeping track of this planet, and why would, when most of the stars are fixed, but some of them move, that must mean something.
Right.
And it comes out, it shows, of course, the three magi showed up because they were following a moving star because they've been looking at the stars. I guarantee you those guys did astrology in some fashion, but in the general suspicion of things that are artistic even. I mean, because there's an artist. I was raised in a tradition where artistic expression was questionable because it's of the world and you can get dragged over into doing that sort of thing. And so, but it is also, of course, is used by, I expect the guy who put it on his cross piece there in Snohomish County is not just thinking it's a philosophical statement, but that it is somehow having an impression on reality. And so they can fall into that, and it's worthwhile being cautious about not performing magic with things, but that's true of almost anything. You know, political ideological alignment. I'm going to go with the people who generally support me and therefore think they're good people. You know, but the magic thing that causes some aversion. The Christian church has had to fight against issues of people, you know, stealing the Eucharist for magical purposes, and so on. And so there are reasons to be concerned. And if one wishes to be concerned all the time, you can fencing rules and, you know, the road of Pharisees is easy to fall. No, but the road of Pharisees is easy to fall on, where you go like, oh, well then this was used by a bad person, so I shall never use it. And that is in the more modern terms, the fact that the Nazis really did like these runes, and they used them on the SS symbol on those terrible people. That's not two S's. That is in fact two S runes, two solar runes, is what was used by the Nazis on their lapels. And for some people, that's sufficient reason to never touch a rune ever. But that same S is used on St. Cuthbert's coffin, which was hauled around by monks after the Viking raid on Lindisfarne. It's an interesting story to follow how they went for very, very, very many years trying to find a place to put him down after the Vikings had come. And I mean, actually 40 years of moving around before they ended up at Durham and established a Christian place there. Right. Okay, so, yes, question?
Sorry, one of these runes on the Anglo-Saxon thing has like an A and an E mushed together, and
Yes.
then it's an S shape.
Yes. So that's an O and an E in that case. It's O and an E. And so it's an sound, like an unmounted O in German, if you know it. That is the Othel one, so that's the one that is used by white separatists. It actually means, really, it means a particular type of inheritance, a mechanism for freehold inheritance, an inheritance that you have because your people were here before the king got here. That's actually what that symbol means, most closely, originally in its use. And was probably used that way to go like, look, this is our property. I didn't get it from the Jarl. I didn't get it from the king. My people have been here for forever, so that's our heritage, and so that's us. And this is why then the white separatists who go, oh, this is our heritage, use that symbol. But it also represents an sound. So if you have a German name, that's one that would very commonly come up with accurately to represent that. So that's.
I thought it was an A, so I fit all my letters in one room.
Okay.
Now I'm not.
Well, you can. No, it was never an A sound. It was always an O, some variant of an O sound. It is not the only vowel. You know, there's a lot of different ways a lot of different O sounds, and other O sounds have been represented by others of the letters in the course of that. So for linguistic time, we need to think about that.
Excellent. Well, I think, Chad, if you would be willing to walk around and maybe
Yeah.
give some guidance for people with the runes, I want to sing like a dwarven. Misty moment. Excellent. Chad, thank you so much. This was illuminating. And so let's use the remaining time to compose. Let's to rune our names.
Yep.
And let's thank Chad for all of his preparation. And